Good morning. It's Friday the 25th of November and I'm Steph Cooper, a member of Haxby and Wigginton Methodist Church in York. Advent begins on Sunday and the first week of Advent is traditionally dedicated to the theme of hope. As Advent is a time of waiting and preparing, having hope as our first focus is important. It sets a tone for our waiting. Some of you might recognise me as the former regional coordinator at Christian Aid, a role that I held for 14 and a half years and a role that I loved. But when the opportunity to take voluntary redundancy was offered at the start of 2020, I felt a bit of a nudge to put my name forward and see what other things I might be able to do. And so at the end of June 2020, right in the middle of the first COVID lockdown, I found myself not working and unsure what I was going to do because, to be honest, life was fairly restricted at the time. I have to admit that it was a bit strange and a bit nerve-wracking, but amongst the lovely cards and messages I received, this verse from Jeremiah 29:11 stayed with me. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Amazingly, almost the same day I finished at Christian Aid, I discovered that a hotel in York was to be used as an asylum hotel and volunteers were needed. And so I found myself spending time each week with men from all around the world, all with their own stories of difficulty, of trauma, of fear, men who had made desperate and difficult journeys from war-torn places or from countries with coercive regimes or poor humanitarian records that they dared to speak out against, or from some other difficult or dangerous situation. Men who had travelled by foot and by various dangerous modes of transport, including small boats, to try to reach safety and to find some hope for the future. Men who had chosen to be parted from their loved ones in the hope of finding a place to call home and to then be able to seek to have their families join them and to give them the hope of a future. And over those weeks and months of spending time with those men, I learned so much about love, about gratitude, about generosity, and about waiting and hoping. They might have reached the UK and applied for asylum, but the waiting and the hoping didn't finish there. No, there was now the wait for their asylum application to be processed, for their interviews to be held, and for a decision to be made as to whether or not they could be granted refuge in the UK. And if a positive decision came through, the waiting and the hoping didn't finish there. No, there was then the process of finding accommodation, a job, a community to accept them, and the long process of applying for wives and children to be able to join them. And I learned so much about resilience, about dignity, about patience and about hope from those men, some who are still waiting now, and one, as I record this, who's just been granted refugee status, but is likely to become homeless in the next few days because he now has to very quickly find somewhere else to live, as he's not entitled to stay in his asylum accommodation. His situation might seem hopeless, but he would negotiate this latest setback, holding on to the hope of a future, the hope of now being able to get a job and become part of his local community. Since COVID, I've not travelled anywhere outside of the UK, but through these men, many who are now my friends, I've been on a journey. I've learned about life in different places and I've cried with people at times of difficulty, and I've celebrated and cried tears of happiness with people in times of joy. Little did I know on that day in the summer of 2020 when I nervously went to the hotel for the first time that it would be a life-changing experience for me. And nor did I expect 2 years on to be working for a refugee charity and to be learning the Arabic language. This year, the Methodist Church's Advent and Christmas resources are entitled There is Room. As part of the introduction to those resources, it says, God makes room for people, for you and for me. In Jesus, God found room in the world in a place of humility. When Jesus was born, God sent angels to visit humble shepherds keeping watch over their sheep in a cold, dark field. God wrote a message in the stars that was read and understood by wise men in a faraway land where people worshipped other gods. People working hard for a low wage and people who weren't religious insiders were the first to hear the good news. Baby Jesus was God's son, and he was born for all people, including them, and including you and me. May we make room, and may we know hope and show hope this Advent. and Christmas season. Amen.